Hey, this is Bob Hamp,
And I am Polly Hamp.
and we want to continue our series called Mental Health at Home so that you can take these small videos and practice whatever you may need to help you kind of continue to both develop and grow in your mental health at home.
Yes.
Which is, of course, one of the missions of Hotbox is to make sure you have opportunities not just outside in the community, but right there in your own home to practice some mental health strategies to grow and change. So this section is on anger and frustration. Da-da-da-da. Isn't our board fancy? I just want to point out that this is my favorite part of my office.
He hung it all up by himself.
I did, which you don't know how unusual that is.
And there was no anger, maybe a little
There
frustration.
was, because one of the mounts broke,
Oh.
and I had to go to the store and get a different kind of mount, which is a perfect segue to say when we talk.
Exactly.
Nice.
Thank you.
When we talk about anger and frustration, one of the first things we have to recognize, I think there's two kind of elements to this. One of them is the present, and one of them is the past. I don't know if I did that right, but the present and the past.
Yeah.
So present anger has to do with recognizing our expectations. Once again, like we talked about with fear, anger is an emotion, and it's an emotion that's designed to show us when a boundary's been crossed or an expectation's been violated. So here's the thing is we have to recognize that not all of our expectations are realistic or healthy. So for instance, if you pull out of your driveway and have an expectation that everybody on the road is going to make it easy for you, that expectation itself is going to lend you to a much greater likelihood of increased anger or frustration while you're driving.
Yes.
I think we all understand that, but it's a helpful illustration to say, sometimes if our expectations are unrealistic, then the number one thing we can do with present anger is examine our expectations and lower them. I've had some people say, so what are you telling me? We shouldn't have any expectations of relationships of people we care about? To which I would say, no, I think what we have to have is realistic expectations. And also not an expectation that we can control other people, but an expectation of what's realistic to expect from them in response based on what we know of them, their personality. So the key to present anger and frustration is an examination of our expectations. Now, I would also say it's important to know that not all expectations are unhealthy,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
we have to have some expectation that how do we have unwritten contracts and agreements in our relationships.
Exactly.
And of course, the more overt they are, the clearer our expectations are, and the less likely our anger and frustration.
Well, let's talk a little bit about overt and covert.
Oh yeah.
And I think, being overt is having the verbal, hey, can we talk a little bit about, the disagreement we had a couple of weeks ago?
About the dishes?
About the dishes.
An example.
And so being very overt about, what happened and having that conversation, and I'm not expecting him to know my covert thoughts.
Okay.
And so covert is that underlying thing of well, he should have read my mind. He should have known that I wanted the dishes cleaned or something.
Yeah, so covert then becomes kind of that nonverbal communication of things. So if it's covert anger, it lends toward kind of angry expressions. By the way, that story didn't happen. We've got plenty that did.
Yeah.
But it's those two.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Anyway, when we have covert anger, what happens is then we behave our anger instead of speak it.
Yeah.
And then that becomes the other person's, crossed expectations, and it can actually multiply anger, right? So present frustration and anger has to do with expectations. I think it's really wise to say the more overt the expectations are, the more you can navigate relationally and personally what your expectations are and when they may be violated in some way. But let's talk about old anger for just a minute.
Okay.
Because old anger tends to be where most people get in trouble. Think of it this way: if you're carrying a cup and it's like filled right up to the rim, it doesn't take much jostling for that cup to spill over. And so if we have old anger in our heart and mind, that old anger, that now it doesn't take much violation of expectations for us to find ourselves in that place of suddenly the anger just spills out.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to really take an honest look about two things. Number one, how your family of origin handled anger, right? And you specifically in your family of origin. If there's someone in your family that's allowed to get angry and you weren't, it's likely you've got some anger that's in there, but you just haven't had permission to express it.
Yeah.
And if your family was just kind of carried around a lot of chronic anger, again, it's likely that you have some just kind of right there below the surface. The key to old anger is to really process it through forgiveness. And what I mean by that isn't letting the other person go, but letting go of your expectations of them from the past, and allowing a healing process that doesn't depend on them changing, but rather depends on you really letting them no longer be the key to your well-being. And then also just, I think, an honest expression of anger. You know, you'll hear us say this again and again. I think Polly said it several times in the series, but journaling, sometimes my typing sounds like this, and sometimes it sounds a little bit more like this, because anger is an emotion, and letting it out in healthy ways. What's a healthy way? A healthy expression of anger is one that allows it to be expressed without doing more harm to someone else, or without, what's the word I'm looking for? The word incendiary goes in my mind, but it doesn't fit the sentence. Without really provoking more anger. In other words, if you express it, you can also kind of recite it and recite it and recite it till you just bring it up and you're mad again. But if you let it out in a way that gives relief, i.e. I'm so angry about this, whether writing, physically writing, or verbally speaking it to a counselor or a trusted friend, not a triangulation in a group of friends, but rather someone that you know is there for the purpose of you venting your anger, letting it out in those ways also can let it kind of be released.
Another one is great to take ice and throw it against a brick wall. You don't have to clean it up, and it just feels good to release anger. If you're in a place where anger is scary, you might not want to do that and just start, earring dropped.
Nice.
You might want
Shouldn't get angry at all.
No, not
frustration.
at all. But just, throw some ice, if you're afraid of anger and that doesn't feel like a safe thing to do yet, just start writing things out, or just kind of really think about, gosh, do I get like frustrated just like that if my kids don't do what I tell them to do, or ask them to do? It's all in how we look at things also. It's like, okay, am I doing the things that help get my point and message across that don't escalate anger? And so it's like, hey, do you have a minute for us to talk about ... And so I'm not coming going, what the bleep happened and why did that not get taken care of? And so it's this communication, and he is a safe person for me to have that kind of communication with. There are people in my life that I do not have that kind of communication with, and some of those people I no longer talk with. And it's really difficult to make those boundaries to be in safe places, because anger can be very dangerous and painful. And so, just kind of know what's going on, but being able to have the conversations and testing the waters with being overt about what's going on. Other people don't get to dictate your emotions. Your kids don't get to dictate your emotions. Your family doesn't get to dictate your emotions, even though they installed them. Your husband, or your wife, or your dog, they don't get to dictate your emotions. You get to do the self-check and going, wow, I'm wondering where that anger is coming from. My response is greater than the event. And so just take some time and do some self-searching, and that is a real intentions on healing on purpose.
Keep in mind that out of the brainstem, when we're in that place of anger, when Polly talked about coming with a kind of a blank sort of approach, if she's in her brainstem, she's likely to provoke the brainstem response in somebody else. But if you can move from connection, this is a challenge for folks, but it's still possible to express anger from a place of connection. Hey, that really hurt me, or that really made me angry is different than what the, and what you discover is anger that comes from the brainstem actually propagates a return of anger, and then it becomes an upward spiral. When we start with the idea that connection is the goal, and connection is the context, we can still express anger in a way that says, look, this is really hurtful to me, or this makes me really angry. But if we can both stay in a place of connection rather than fuel the anger, we can actually then bring it down. So anger is both old anger and new anger. New anger has to do with expectations and boundaries. Old anger has to do with how we've learned to process it and how we've learned to handle it in our family of origin. Both of those matter for how you experience anger today. And there's tons of ways, including the journaling, kind of deep breathing, thinking differently about it and letting your mind tell you what you've believed that made you angry.
Yes.
All those different things can help you look at anger in a way that lessens it in your life instead of magnifies it.
That's right. You guys have a great day and keep an eye out for more videos.